Hey, thank you all so much for joining another episode of Celeste Therapist Podcast. My name is Celeste. I'm a therapist from Boston. I have a special guest with me. I'm going to have her introduce herself to you all. Oh, 1 second. Sorry. All right, there you go. I was on mute.
Oh, no worries. Hi, everyone. My name is Kaitlin Smith. I'm currently a PhD student in history of science, studying the history of psychology at Harvard. And I'm also an MSW. I previously did psychotherapy or offered psychotherapy to people. And I'm also the founder and lead facilitator of a venture called Our Wild Minds, which helps BIPOC and women who identify as gifted befriend and operationalize their natural gifts.
Wow, that's amazing. That's a lot, which we're going to understand and learn about. The natural gifts piece is something I think about a lot, especially for people in the Black community, and just how I think our gifts are utilized for products and other things, other the way people have grown, but not we don't see it for ourselves. We don't realize it. I'm always talking to people, and I'm like, I'm amazed at how they think, and they're always surprised because obviously I'm on the outside looking in, and I say, "Wow, you're so this or that." And it was like, you know what? I never thought about it like that because they haven't been told. So yeah, so I'm excited to talk to you. But before we learn about like what you're doing now, tell us a little bit about your upbringing.
Oh, goodness, my upbringing. Let's see. Well, I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and I now live in the Boston area, but lived until I was 17 in greater Cleveland. And I grew up in an interracial family with a parent who's African American and a white parent. And goodness, where to begin? I guess one part of my origin story that's relevant to some of the themes that we're going to be talking about, are just that I was someone who um, was fortunate to be identified as quote unquote gifted when I was pretty young, in elementary school. So I ended up having the opportunity to participate in talented and gifted programming in my school district, and I think that was pretty rich for me in various ways. But I'm quite aware that there are so many people, particularly Black folks and other people of color, who don't have that experience, who don't receive that label, or aren't identified ultimately, and then you
Well,
know
since you threw out the word gifted, just for people who may be confused or not understand what that means, um, what is it about you that where people were able to identify that that's some of the talent that you have?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that clarifying question. That's so crucial. It's so important to define a term like that because it's so fraught and is deployed in really complicated and at times unhelpful ways, in my opinion. So to speak to your question, though, I think that at the time that I was in elementary school, in the early '90s, I received that label in connection with, I think, IQ testing that was done in my elementary school. And often the traditional conception or definition of giftedness that's employed in educational settings is a student who uh, has an IQ of 130 or above. But increasingly, IQ as a meaningful measure or a single measure of intelligence has been coming under scrutiny from a number of different directions, which I think is really important. So increasingly, there's been attention to other frameworks, including the developmental psychologist Howard Gardner's concept of multiple intelligences. And I was really fortunate in that that was an idea that was that the principal of my elementary school, really believed in, and was really passionate about educating the community about, and our parents. So we were also we had resources that helped us kind of understand our our capacities in a more multidimensional way, not just like this person's book smart, but also like this person's really skilled in music, or they have like a high degree of kinesthetic intelligence, and their body, their ability to move their body is quite exceptional. So yeah, so that was how giftedness was defined at that stage in my life, and that's kind of how I was, I guess, drawn into that world. But it wasn't
Wow.
until it wasn't until later in my life, and when I was training as a psychotherapist, and after that, that I found myself circling back to this idea of giftedness and realizing that it was relevant to my adult life too, in ways that I wasn't aware of before.
That's really good. One of the things I remember reading is that people that are kind of talented, because being book smart, a lot of times it's picked up on quickly. There's so many other things besides the IQ score being smart in that way, that people are, but they have a hard time finding a place in society, because it feels like there's no direct route to it. It could be unconventional. Like me choosing this path of therapy, it's, go to school, get a degree, get a license, and then, you become a therapist. There are so many other things and ways that people function and their gifts that unfortunately I say there's a lot of gifts in the graveyard because people have never tapped into it. So for you to have, it sounds like the school or the leader of the school was already on that bandwagon, and you were able to tap to that, which is not, unfortunately, it's not common. That experience, whether you are black or white, like I just think that that's not a conventional experience. Does that sound accurate to you?
Definitely. Yeah, I completely agree. And I love that phrase that you used, even though it's like painful to contemplate it. This idea of gifts in the graveyard. I just think it's so poignant and just
Yeah.
captures the situation so well. And yeah, I'm quite grateful to have been
Yeah.
in an elementary school
Yeah.
where our principal was, trying to like really like work with these more expansive ways of understanding
Yeah.
intelligence.
Yeah. So now you finish, you're in Ohio, and you finish your high school years. What made you decide to go to school for social work initially?
Well, I actually, when I went to college, I studied sociology and anthropology and Black studies. Those were my areas of focus at that stage. And it wasn't until after that that I decided to pursue clinical social work in a program that is focused on psychodynamic psychotherapy, and those kinds of approaches. And for folks who may be listening and maybe aren't familiar with that idea, psychodynamic psychotherapies are the modalities that have emerged or that kind of grew out of Freud's psychoanalytic vision, but that have diverged from some of his attitudes and approaches in various ways. So I ended up pursuing that training after my undergraduate studies in a master's program. And I would say, in short, what inspired me to pursue that line of study was that when I was in college, I was just so immersed in studying the social world and kind of attempting to examine, I guess, interpersonal relations and like what's sort of happening in society from a macro level, which I felt was really stimulating. And I really appreciated having that opportunity to connect various dots that I'd been, thinking about prior to that time in my life. But by the time I was wrapping up my studies in college, I arrived at this place where I had become kind of burned out on, I guess, macro level analysis. And
It's a lot, Caitlin.
yeah,
But yeah, I
yeah,
always tell people I'm glad I didn't understand just how much systems and the barriers were there, because I don't know if I would have kept going. But
yeah, exactly.
if I'm researching it, it's probably even worse. As far as the awareness, it's could feel depressing, I'm sure at times.
Absolutely, absolutely. I completely relate to that. And yeah, I also I think that in short, I just started to become more and more frustrated by, I guess, the lack of space to, I guess, explore, how should I even articulate it? I guess a sense of inner possibility and the capacity for healing and transformation, even in the context of oppression and,
Yes.
a lot of madness
Yes.
happening out there.
Yeah, I want to. Well, so what Kaitlin is saying is essentially like, I always tell people my approach to therapy is very holistic. It wasn't what I learned in school. I look at the full person, and in school we didn't have that kind of upbringing or education around. There's this book called the DSM, which we utilize to diagnose. Insurances requires it, and it's something like kind of like the Bible of psychology, which we've and it just doesn't. I don't use it. It doesn't fit people. It doesn't. I mean, when people have vast different things that have gone on in their life, and to put a sticker on them, I don't feel as fair, and it doesn't feel humane, and especially for Black people, I think there's just so much that goes along with the way that we struggle, and so like I always say, I'm very unconventional, because it's not the way that school was taught. It's just my knowledge from working with people and before even going to school, and just the way I've learned. Because I tell people it's not just education learning in the traditional sense that school provides, but I think we can learn on our own and research. I'm 40 and I had to go to the library to go look at encyclopedias. I said now we can look on our computer, on our phone. You don't even have to go to the library. But I wanted to I wanted to reiterate. I 100% understand what you're saying. And that's why I take the approach I take. It's because the way we were taught doesn't work for the population that I work with.
Mm. Yeah, that completely resonates with me. Yeah, I have so many thoughts about the DSM. And it's heartening to me to hear you say that as someone who is also someone who's a leader in the field, and yeah, is putting these issues on people's radars.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, this is the podcast was created, right? I think that I used to go online and share about mental health, and people would say, "Oh, you're a therapist. That's the only reason why." And I said, "No, like I'm a human." And so I said, "Let me get other people on from different modalities to talk about what they're doing and how they're doing it, because the way it's set up here in America, if you don't have insurance or finances, they only look at therapy and psychiatry as the only modality, and there's just so many other ways for us to work on healing. And so my goal was to get that message out. So to Caitlin's point, this is the reason why she got burnt out. And you're so smart and intellectual that you've seen it before. I didn't see it until later on. I'm like, this is but you were on the macro level. You were up here looking at everything. You're like, whoa, this doesn't make sense. So you picked up on it quickly. Well, not quick enough because you've done your master's.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's quite a story, and I
Yeah.
would love to hear your story around all of this sometime too. But yeah, I guess to zero in on, I think, one particular, I guess, tension or conflict I felt in the course of my master's studies that really brought a lot of these themes into focus. Um, Something that I encountered during my first year of training, when I was doing a field practicum in San Francisco, was that I ended up basically being pathologized by some of the people who were training me for being too intellectual. And not only was this statement just sort of offered up to me like in general, but it was also explicitly racialized. And the advisor I had, the field advisor who was kind of like monitoring my performance in my field practicum, went so far as to, I guess, decide, and this was a white woman, by the way, she went so far as to decide that, my manner of speech, the way that I think, the way that I present myself was was a manifestation of some sort of attempt to, I guess, distance myself from other Black people and kind of curry favor with white people. And that because I guess apparently from her perspective, when Black women are being authentic and like keeping it real, quote unquote, they don't show up in the ways that I show up or communicate in the ways that I communicate, which is just so immensely problematic on so many levels. And there's a lot more to that story, but I'll just say that that was a watershed moment for me that that really prompted just a wave of reflection that has
Wow.
continued for many years. And this situation that I'm describing happened roughly 10 years ago now. So this is a while ago.
Wow.
But I think that, I had encountered these these conceptions of blackness that that imagine Black people as unintelligent and
Yeah.
just all of these horribly racist notions, throughout my life, of course, as a Black person. But I think that encountering it in this clinical setting and in a setting in which clinical education or like training was supposed to be going on was just
Yeah.
really astounding. And
Yeah.
though I didn't encounter anything quite that severe, um, later in my training experience, I did continue to have these experiences that made it clear to me that there was something about the way that my mind worked or the way that I was showing up in space that was kind of posing problems for me with others and just sort of prompting them to, it was prompting things to get lost in translation. And the long and the short of it is that I ultimately decided that doing one-on-one psychotherapy with folks was not necessarily the type of role I wanted to continue in. I think in part shaped by some of those experiences. But the experience that I had definitely lodged a set of questions in my mind that, that I then went on to think about for a while. And eventually it prompted me to, think more broadly about the continuities between my own experiences and, like people of color and also like women who have intersecting experiences. And at some point, I started to think about these challenges that I encountered in connection with this idea of giftedness that I'd been introduced to as a kid, but that it was never really explained to me that this might be something that will continue to impact your life in some way as you age and you know become an adult. And eventually, I discovered some literature on giftedness in adults, including a book called Gifted Grownups and another called just The Gifted Adult. And that was really, really helpful for just helping
Nice.
put some of the pieces together. And eventually, I pursued some continuing education related to gifted psychology and some other psychotherapeutic modalities like ecotherapy. And
Mhm.
through this, I guess, convergence of different forces and experiences, and also participating in some virtual programming for gifted adults, I realized that I was really excited to create a container in which gifted BIPOC and women could sort of explore some of these themes together in a way that's clinically informed, but ultimately not really a therapy group, and like encompasses sort of like intellectual exploration as well.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I just want to point out, I like to use this podcast as like a learning experience as well for people.
Yeah.
What Kaitlin did was she was able to find her tribe. And that's something, regardless of if you're talking about being gifted or any other things that you may find yourself struggling with. She sounds like you started with books and your own, like kind of looking into that, and then being able to look for other modalities that worked where you didn't feel alone. Imagine like not just that teacher, but your other experiences. If that was and what our wild minds, but how amazing our minds are, is that if she only allowed those experiences to be her narrative, she would have just kind of like felt lost. And I do believe there's something about our mind and our body. If we're not living out our like purpose or who we are, I feel like there's this uncomfortableness that comes with like operating in life when we don't really understand ourselves, and we're allowing society or what people have said to be the narrative. And so you didn't allow that to happen. And I do encourage people. I say I feel like we all have within us the ability to understand ourselves, but we got to find the right tribe. We got to really work on being intentional. And I find that once we start that journey of intention, it's kind of like a domino effect. The next thing, your mind is starting to open up, and it's actually starting to look for that mindset as opposed to the mindset of that professor, right? Like if you don't give it a new narrative, it's gonna just look for all the ways that you don't fit in, that you're not enough. And so that's really an amazing you took the bad and created good out of it. And I just find that to be amazing. And I think it can encourage somebody that may be struggling with something in their life that they've been told that they're not good enough, or they're not this, or they're not that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for saying that. I really appreciate,
Yeah.
just the mirroring that you're offering. And yeah, it's also great to hear it's also great to hear you weigh in on the story I just shared with you, because something that I think a number of folks have experienced who are part of the gifted community is having had, like dimensions of their being that are like related to giftedness pathologized. And this is very common. So it's very affirming and exciting
Yeah.
to, just hear your reaction and your own thinking about what I shared with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. It's I had like listening to you talk, it's like, gosh, if you didn't do the research or like dilute her narrative. And unfortunately this happens more often than I wished. And so I know that that point is going to help somebody. So now you decide this traditional like MSW route, which is a master's in social work, is it going to work? But you finish that degree up?
I did.
Okay, good. You finished that degree up, and now you're starting to think about things differently, and which is great, right? I find I say like free thinkers in America don't work for America because they can't control us. um, but it's important to think freely. I mean, sometimes you may like I find myself thinking different than the average person. I don't feel like I subscribe to the modality here, the marketing and things. Like I really, and it has created a sense of inner peace in me, and it's something that I didn't grow up in. I always tell people that because I think when people when I talk about how I feel now and and mental health, people just think like I was bathed in it and mental health and just thinking this way, and I wasn't. It wasn't until I became an adult and did what you did and started doing my own kind of research and connecting with people that thought about things like me. So you did that, and then tell me what your next steps are now that you found your tribe and you realize you become grounded in who you are. So you're unstoppable when you're grounded in who you are.
Oh, well, that's so kind of you to say. Yeah, I feel the same way. Yeah, as far as where I am right now, I think I mentioned briefly at the beginning that I'm now in a PhD program in the field of history of science, pursuing research on the history of psychology that is informed in part by some of the unfortunate experiences I had, but also informed by other areas of interest that I have. So I'm early in that course of study, so I haven't started actively working on my dissertation yet, but I'm really looking forward to one day getting to a place where I can translate some of these really challenging experiences into resources that can hopefully be useful to folks, both, everyday people and also clinicians, and
Yeah.
scholars too. So that's my ambition. And in the meantime, I'm really excited to start working with other gifted Black adults who are looking for community and also just a chance to explore some of the histories that bear on our experiences and also, you know, just engage in some emotional processing, and then also just engage in some embodied practices that can help us kind of ground ourselves in the context of this sort of
Yeah.
like intellectual, emotional, kinesthetic
Yeah.
experience.
And all of it like is important and matters. The somatic, the body stuff is again one of the things I've kind of done a lot of research on my own and have brought it into my sessions, and it just brings on a new way of kind of operating in life when when you're able to be fully in your body. And this therapist on my podcast one time says a lot of us have been divorced from our bodies because of just the experiences have been so hard, which just creates a lot of anxiety when you cannot be in the moment. And so being able to be in the moment and grounded in who you are is important. And so part of what's birthed out of all of your experiences is our wild minds. Tell people a little bit about that, Brandon, because I read it and I was like, wow, this is amazing. I always said it. So yeah, so I'm gifted in other ways, and I recognize that I'm not. But when it comes to books and research, is traditionally, it takes me a little longer to grasp information. Like I understand that, but like I can see a client today and see them 2 years later, and I remember everything from today. There's different ways. I say there's ways that I'm really smart in that others may not be. So I've never looked at it as the word gifted, but I'm gonna start saying that now.
Yeah.
But I've learned that on my own. So I always say that like I would love to go to school to understand the mind better because it just fascinates me because it's the most underutilized part of our body, but it just allows so much function or dysfunction to take place if it's not utilized correctly.
Yeah.
Tell people about like how you came up with that.
Yeah, well, first, I would just love to maybe say a little bit about, I guess, the definition of maybe intelligence or giftedness that
Yeah.
we're working with, just to speak to what you were just saying about how you're relating to this concept. And I just thought that was so powerful. Um, I've really been inspired by the work of Howard Gardner, who I think I mentioned earlier, and he's best known for popularizing the concept of multiple intelligences. And he defined like a number of them initially and then added some on later. But they're verbal linguistic intelligence, logical mathematical intelligence, spatial visual intelligence, bodily kinesthetic intelligence, musical intelligence, interpersonal intelligence, intrapersonal intelligence, naturalist intelligence, and existential intelligence. And
Never heard of that, but yeah, those lay into a lot of different areas.
yeah,
Okay, sorry. Go ahead. That's fascinating to me. Go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, yeah, no worries. And part of why I wanted to mention it was just that I was hearing what you were saying a moment ago, and just thinking that I think people who are, incredible psychotherapists have a strong interpersonal intelligence, like a strong ability to tap into other people's emotional worlds and be present to them, and also a deep capacity for intrapersonal intelligence as well, like that capacity to chart your own, inner emotional landscape so that you can show up for others.
Oh
Um,
wow, yeah, that's so true. Now I have language because I always like just kind of talk about it, but now I have more language and a person to that's thank you for shit. I just learned something new about myself. I love that. Like that's and imagine if like this was mainstreamed,
mm,
right? Because just because I can't like it takes me longer to study or do this.
mm,
But like what if I tapped into the other areas of my imagine if it was mainstream and people understood that. Like, how that would make people feel that sense of confidence and, oh
mm.
my goodness. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree with that. And yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that one of the really unfortunate things about the way that the concept of giftedness is often deployed by people is that I think that um, for various reasons, in a number of contexts, it's sort of invoked as a label that is supposed to suggest superiority or something, which I think is completely unhelpful and just not relevant. But I think, unfortunately, that connotation has had a lot of staying power. And I think that's also made it harder to talk about this as well because of that. But the way I see it is that I've really been inspired by the work of Abraham Maslow, who created the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And something that he wrote in one of his books is the notion that capacities are needs, which was just reading that was like a watershed moment for me. Because as I think about these different intelligences that I was just describing from that multiple intelligences model, and how a given individual may exhibit like a unique constellation of those intelligences and be really gifted in particular areas. It's not like someone can just have those capacities and then not use them without big problems resulting. If you imagine, a bird with clipped wings, or a bird that would ordinarily sing that, doesn't sing for whatever reason because it's being stopped from singing, or, like a caged bird to, like, I'm thinking of Maya Angelou. That's a big problem. If you have particular capacities, but you don't feel like you're operating in an environment in which you're able to exercise them, or you're operating in an environment in which maybe the people around you aren't like mirroring back to you that this is within you, like you were just saying about the interpersonal and intrapersonal intelligence. Like, I think that having that opportunity to be mirrored by another in community is just so crucial to coming to know ourselves and coming to understand what's possible for ourselves in this world. So that's really that. I guess insight is really what inspired me to create Our Wild Minds, which is my venture, and the Black Brilliance Circle within it, which will be starting this June. It's really just that desire to kind of take these different things that I've learned and studied and translate it into a community experience that can hopefully allow people to not kind of continue existing in a vacuum of, not having others to reflect back those multitudes and, these constellations of intelligence, and be among other Black folks who, who are eager to dive into these issues together.
Thank you for sharing that. I think about the caged bird and because I said when we're not living out our like who we are, it doesn't feel comfortable. And the caged bird metaphor is like such a great example on what it feels like. And I just want to point out the difference with the caged bird and us is that we don't have physical barriers. There's mental barriers, which again, like I said, the mind is so powerful. It can be a place of dysfunction or functionality. And so, like, I think it's important for us to understand, my listeners, is that like, yes, like you may have these gifts or things that like is who you are, and it is nice to have somebody mirror it or validate, right? Like my clients are able to have that. Everyone doesn't have that ability for many different reasons. So I want to encourage you to do what Kaitlin talked about earlier and doing the research and things like that, because it is amazing to be able to have the validation and the acknowledgement and things like that. But I do know it's not possible, and know that there are no physical the cage, the physical cage isn't stopping us. It's the mental cage. And the mental cage could be even powerful because the regular cage we could try to cut out or slip out, but the mental one, the mental one is really I really don't think the average person understands just how much the mind controls so much of the way we operate. And if we're not engaged in it, it just goes off of our experiences. And if you've had a lot of hard experiences, then it's a really hard way to live life. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. That metaphor really like spoke to me when I think about how people are trapped in their minds, and not having that mirror happen. And so out of Our Wild Minds, you developed another program. Can you explain that for people, and what it's about and who the population is for?
Yeah, absolutely. So, within our Wild Minds, I'm getting ready to offer the Black Brilliance Circle, which will be a live virtual course that's starting in June of 2023. If people are potentially listening to this after 2023. And the vision for this course is to gather together a group of about 10 Black adults virtually on Zoom. And the idea is that we're going to be kind of exploring the history of racialized intelligence testing and barriers to identification as gifted, and also just exploring some of the intersections between what's increasingly being described as gifted trauma and also racial trauma, and some of the unique dimensions of being a gifted Black person in an anti-Black world that disavows and kind of doesn't know what to do with Black intelligence, especially Black intelligence that shows up in ways that are maybe not expected by certain people. And then ultimately, we're also going to be turning to various resources that can inspire us to sort of continue cultivating, and ultimately sharing our brilliance, if you will, with the world, by turning to Afro surrealism, Afrofuturism, and yeah, thinking about Black giftedness, Black brilliance in a more than human world. Even, amid these efforts to dehumanize Black people, how can we sort of find our place in this wider ecology by expressing our intelligences authentically, in the context of community. So in a very small nutshell, that's the idea, and it's a 6-month course. So we still have a few spots available for anyone who is maybe hearing this and is interested in participating. And the vision is to offer it in the future as well. So that's what it's about, though.
In a nutshell, that sounds like a lot. It sounds, very unconventional, which is needed, because all of these conventional ways, we're not getting better. And it's not by accident, that we're not getting better. When, you look at the history and of psychology and just of America, and we are subscribing to it. I seen somebody post and they said the people that will go to like herbalist or holistic doctor, people like call them like, oh, you going to them, might not go to the regular MD doctor, but and I'm not against MD doctors, but it's the mindset that people have when they take the natural route, but then the MDs are getting paid kickback from the pharmaceutical companies. And so, it's just interesting how this thing is thrown out, and free thinkers and people that challenge the system are looked at as those people. Um, and it's unfortunate. And, my goal is to help people really create a system that works for them, and unapologetic. It is hard. It's hard when you realize you're different and you don't subscribe. It can be a lonely process initially, I'll admit. But I do know that going through that process allows so much more freedom. I don't feel like I'm in a cage anymore, even though there's not a lot of people that think like me. Like, I'll read something and I'll get inspired. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so good. But there's this inner like bliss, happiness that I find that money can't purchase, right? If I always tell people, if money, if things were what created happiness and peace, then America should be the less depressed and anxious population, but we're the most. And so it's really important. The work that you're doing is really inspiring, and I'm happy that there's like I've never met somebody that is creating these systems in the way that you are to educate and create community. So I think that's really amazing.
Well, thank you so
Yeah,
much.
yeah. That's awesome. So before you go, I would love to hear what your modality is for your healing? Like, what do you do on a regular basis to like survive and live in a world that wasn't designed for you? What keeps you grounded?
Wow. That is such a great question. Um, what you were just saying about herbalism is what comes to mind for me. So I'm really into herbalism too. And I'm a naturalist and I love to immerse myself in the outdoors. So going on walks in the forest and in other places, and also um, harvesting wild foods and medicines is one of the things that I really enjoy doing. And as you were talking a moment ago, just about well, I don't want to try to say I don't remember exactly what you said, and I don't want to try to quote you because I'm not going to succeed. But I was thinking as you were talking about my love of reishi mushrooms. Um, do you use reishi at all?
No, 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 but I've heard of it. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I was thinking of reishi because it's this incredible medicinal mushroom, and it grows in relative abundance in our region here in Greater Boston and in a lot of other places as well. And I've really enjoyed consuming this mushroom. It helps to ease stress and induce relaxation and kind of um, like broaden one's perspective on things in a state of relaxation. And I really enjoyed learning one particular, I guess, an additional perspective about it from this Canadian herbalist on YouTube named Terry Willard. He, in an interview that he did, he shared something about how there is maybe a tradition in China in which reishi is prescribed to academics to protect them from their own minds, which I think is hilarious. And then when I thought about it, I thought, oh, yeah, he's right. I can
Wow.
do this. So that's definitely a tool I really enjoy using. And I think it's a useful tip for different kinds of gifted folks as well, like particularly
Yeah.
people who, exhibit a lot of intensity, complexity and drive in like the intellectual space, and
Hmm.
other kinds of giftedness as well. But I think that for anyone who has like that constant churning of ideas that just won't cease, the reishi is really, really helpful for. It doesn't like dumb you down or anything like that, but it just sort of creates a calming effect and helps me, and I think other people as well, like take a step back and put things in perspective, and sort of see my place in the grand scheme of things a little more easily, so that every single thing that's going through my mind doesn't feel like an emergency. Um,
Mm. Thank you for sharing that. And I want to say, because it's funny because you brought up ecotherapist and nature just now, but we had an ecotherapist on, and it was my first time hearing of that terminology. But I'm a nature person, but it wasn't something I grew up in. It was something I've grown to love. And even when you talk about the mushrooms, and I think about, I had a psychologist on, and he just kind of shared. No, actually, he was a psychiatrist, and he was talking about lithium. But he shared how some of these natural elements are not widely broadly marketed because no one can get paid. They can't patent the mushroom. You can't, these, and I just want to educate my audience so that they can do their due diligence with looking at different things that may work, that may not be on your commercial at 2 a.m. Because if if hey, you listen, Caitlin. If I'm on a commercial, who's gonna pay for a commercial that talks about moving your body and getting sun? Who's gonna? No one's gonna get paid for that. So there, you'll never see a commercial about that. So I want people to really think about how they can really think for themselves. Especially if you find yourself not getting better. If you find yourself content and things are working, like keep going. But if you feel like you're not getting better. It's not, sometimes it's not you, it's society. It's, these things that, and I love that I've stepped out of my comfort zone. And, I was talking to my husband last night and I said, I can't believe like I'm doing what I do because I never liked the spotlight. Even when I worked at the shelter, I was like, I just want to get rich so that I can like create a date program for people to go to. They don't have to be out in the cold. I never wanted to be on camera or anything like that. And to do but my passion for people and educating people is what led me to this kind of way that I'm moving in life now. And I just want people to like educate themselves because there's so much at our resource, even breathing. I teach people about deep breathing, and there's just so much that we can do to work on settling our system that we're not taught. Emotions, right? We're not taught about our emotions. And the more I've identified them, the less power they've had over like my decision making. So I really appreciate this conversation. It was so empowering, and we're so much in alignment with the way that we operate and think. And your girl is gifted. I'm gifted. So, thank you for that. Tell people how they can reach you if you have anything you want to say. I really appreciate you coming on to share your story with us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Celeste. It's been so wonderful chatting with you, and I've so enjoyed connecting and hearing more about you and sharing more about what I'm up to. The best place for people to go to learn more about my offerings in this area is ourwildminds.com. So that's OUR wildminds.com. And I'm also on Instagram. It's our.wildminds. And I would say that those are the best places to start for anyone who wants to learn more.
Okay. Thank you so much. Kaitlin, this was amazing. I appreciate your time, your energy, your intelligence, just everything that you're doing for us. It's really appreciated.